So, welcome to Thinkers 50 and the celebration of the International Women's Day. We women in academia tend to be a little humble, so instead of introducing ourselves, we decided to introduce each other. So I can introduce to you to this wonderful researcher and practitioner, Connie Cárdenas de Santamaría. She's a psychologist and couple therapist, and has more than 20 years of research in the area of women. She used to be the vice rector, academic vice rector in the Universidad de los Andes in Colombia, and she's been there a full professor, still is now, and she has different positions as the chair of a very interesting research on women and power. She's also handles the university gender portfolio with a series of programs, workshops that I will very much like to talk about that. But also she does consultant to different companies in terms of gender. And I really think it's one of the best gender scholars I've ever met. And I'm very happy to have this conversation with you today.
Thank you so much, Celia. You really powered me up. Yes, now I would like to, first of all, thank Celia for inviting me to this conversation with her to share our mutual experiences and what we have been doing jointly. And I would like to introduce Celia as a wonderful woman. Yes, because she has really been in the fight, if I can put it that way, of women in academia, women in upper management positions, women students, and she is presently the Deputy Dean for Ethics, Diversity, and Inclusion at Instituto Empresa in Madrid. She is a full professor at the Institute. She has been the director of the Diversity Center since she founded it. So she has been really carrying on this for over 20 years and doing it not only at her university, but also in different companies where she does some consulting. She has written books, and she has a very interesting book about the story of her family, which is something that, that for me, it mirrors what we women are able to do. We're interested in so many things, and we manage, as Celia is showing us, that we can get a lot of things going. And she has been the leader of the Women Initiative in the IE, and that way she has created an international board, of which I am gladly a member, that has brought us to see different ways of attending the women issue in universities and in organizations. So I'm very glad to be here with you, Celia.
That was a good idea that you introduced me, because then I'm much more empowered that I have done it myself. But the reason why we decided to have this conversation is like Connie and I met probably like 17, 18 years ago when I just arrived at IE, and they asked me to manage the Diversity Center, and I wanted to do something on women. And then the now president told me, you absolutely have to talk to Connie, because Connie was at the time doing a very interesting research in Latin America on women and power. So I decided to ask her to help me into that conference. We decided to put together some women leaders in the Latin American region and in the Arab world, and try to see how was woman, business, and power working together in the different regions. And that was the beginning of a very long journey of developing gender programs. Remember that conference?
Yes, I want to bring something up that came as an interesting experience for me in that meeting in Madrid, because, all the women were Arab women from Arab countries. The only Latin American was myself. But I felt so much in touch with these women, the way they looked physically and the way they behaved, the way they moved. I felt so much in Latin America, in a Latin country, although they were all Arabs, that I would switch to Spanish very easily, and they would look at me and say, no, we don't understand what you're saying. Because I felt, like they were like my classmates. So that was a very interesting cultural experience. Plus, you organize presentations of several leaders in Spain and otherwise. And it was an interesting way of starting a relationship that has lasted all these years, sharing our experiences both at the universities, at each university, as well as in organizations and corporations.
And tell me, Connie, why, when, how, and the most important question, why you began your journey in gender issues? It was passion, it was luck, or how you started?
Now that you asked that, when I have been asked that question in other places, I say that in my case, it was genetics. Because my grandfather did his dissertation as a lawyer in 1913 about the rights of married women. So
Wow.
I always say, that maybe there was some genetics in it. But no, going down to my own research, I have always been interested in women's issues, different sort of issues, abortion, incomplete families. I started that as a psychologist. But this research on women in upper management was because one of the dean then asked me if I wanted to participate in an international research that was being carried out by a professor then working at Simmons College in Boston, Sylvia Maxfield. And, when we went to present the data, this was at the end of 2002, when we went to present the data in Boston, and I presented the data about Colombia, I had done interviews, and a woman from the public asked me, how do you understand or how can you explain that Colombia is the country with the highest percentage of women in Latin America, in upper management positions in Latin America? And I was like, and I said, well, I sort of thinking of how I can answer this question. And I said very openly, very honestly, I don't know. I'm finding out with your question. And that has led my research since then, and that we published some stuff then. And then I carried out that research again, but then I led that research in 2009, 10, 11. We published it in 14 with interviews of women in upper management in 17 Latin American countries. And that is my latest research. And then I moved on into looking at the university, which is when we have met Albert again. But yes, we can talk about some of the findings. But my main interest has been, what are the barriers that these women have encountered, and what have been the challenges, and where have they found their support to reach upper management positions in private organizations?
Mm. That's interesting. I think to me it was a little bit probably the reverse journey, because I began my career in a bank. So I began as a practitioner, and then I moved into an NGO, and then I moved into academia. So academia was kind of my third career. So before that, I have felt how women are in the bank, the position of women in the bank, in my flesh, if you want. So I could see there, and that was interesting because whenever there was the older executive in the bank saying, well, all the younger, you should enter because we have a network. And at the time I was thinking, that was my mother's time. In my time, there is no whatsoever barriers, and I have absolutely equally opportunities. After 4 years in the bank, then I started realizing that my colleagues were keep on raising, and I keep on seeing less and less women as I was like moving up. And then is when I start like reflecting what is going on. And then of course the very young that will enter the bank, they say, no, that was your generation, there is no problems now. So it was something that always keep in my mind, how come we all think it's an issue that is all over, but however it's not over. We keep on coming back and back, and we still have like very serious barriers that we cannot probably we cannot overcome. I don't know what is still the problem is.
Yeah. You know what I think that to a certain extent there have been some changes, and we can talk about that further, but the discrimination has become more subtle. It is less aware. I see it in my students and my colleagues. It's like we feel that because we have been discussing gender issues and because this is in the press and, and they are signaling out women that make it in organizations, we feel that now there are no barriers or there's no discrimination. But I really believe that by speaking with these women and my own experience too, is that discrimination has become more subtle. More men are into this subject, they are more interested in this and in supporting women, which I think is wonderful, and that's a way to go now. But the discrimination is still there. When you see the numbers, I don't know what you think, but when you see the numbers, the CEO positions are still held mostly by men.
Totally. And then what I think is subtle discrimination. I mean, it's kind of like hidden discrimination, but also I think the barriers change from more external to more internal. I don't know if I talked to you about this. I used to do this workshop, and I did it in Brazil, in Saudi Arabia, in Norway, in London, in Spain, and in Senegal. And it was very interesting because I would put like external barriers and then internal without telling them they were external or internal, and then solutions. And then they will have different groups and identifying the three most important barriers. Now, in places like Saudi Arabia or Senegal, it was very clear that it was an external barrier. It was the legal system, the lack of opportunities. Now, whenever we did the same in London or Spain or Norway, the very one first barrier was lack of interest or insecurity. And we were doing in many of them, they were MBAs, they were in like very, very top schools. And number one barrier, it was insecurity. So somehow once the external barriers were removed, like in countries like Norway or London or Spain to a certain extent, then somehow there was like internal things popping up. And whenever countries that have a very serious thing to face, like the legal system or the culture, chauvinistic culture, then it was very clear that the first thing to remove, it was external barriers. So on the one side, I think in many countries that we think that discrimination is over, we have on the one side a more subtle way of more unconscious bias, if you want, but also have these internal things that has a lot to do with maternity, with roles, with a lot of like cultural issues that we still have in our unconscious. And it's, I think, the balance of these two, external and internal, and that's why the numbers still do not move. They move, what you were saying in the figures, I mean, we did this research in Spain in 2007 and 2017 to see the 10 years, how things have changed. Now we realize, like in the top of the very top companies, like in the IBEX 35 or in the very top, the number of women on boards in the very large corporation has moved tremendously. Now probably we are around 30%, while at the time perhaps it was 7%. However, if we go to the majority of the organization, more than 60% of women still have clerical jobs or jobs without responsibilities. So still, it's very much stagnated where the woman move in the organization. Although in the very top, because of everything that we did, including things that you and I did with the media and with the Congress and with everything, there is like at least a clear understanding that at the top, women need to be at least a few in order to, they need a presence of women on the top. I don't know what is your view on that.
Several things come to my mind with what you have just said. When you say unconscious bias, we have worked in feminine awareness, gender awareness in different organizations and with open courses too. And you make a lot of progress. Women that come in, this is a 24 or 18 hour, through 3 months. And when some of these women, when they come in, I always ask myself, here it's because they're interested. It's not like a mandatory course in school, but they deny that there is any discrimination, that they ever had any problems. They don't see them. And when we do the different exercises so that they become aware, or we use cases for them to see what has happened to other women, then they begin to realize it. So that's part of the internal part that you were mentioning. And with your percentage of women and in Spain in board meetings, there is this, I don't know if I should say magical, because it's not magical, it hasn't moved. There's this very interesting research that was carried out by the organization that Jenna Rollins, the actress from the movie Thelma and Louise, and she mentions that when she had a child, and she put the child, I forget if it was a boy or girl, I think it was a girl, she would put her to watch TV while she prepared dinner or whatever it was. And she started seeing that there were not many women in the display, in a mob or in a meeting, a social meeting or whatever. There were not very many women. There were always mostly men. So she asked her group, she founded this organization to do the research, and she asked the men and women to do the research, and they found that since 1946, and when they show on TV or on the movies a take of women, of a mob or a group of people, there's always only 17% women. Now, that's the same number that Forbes in 2020 published, that the percentage of women in board meetings. And that's the same percentage of women in upper management in Canada. And so you can go on and on and on. So I say, is this unconscious? Has it been sort of drilled into our unconscious that that's the way it should be? So sometimes I wonder, what are all the elements that work into this, But
so you think, yeah, sorry.
No, go ahead.
You think or job or work or that many other women and men in the last 20 years, you think we have achieved something? Something has been improved, or is it like?
My students, I teach and undergraduates, assistants, research assistants, and they said that they were going to write an article about the positive aspects of women in power. And I said, well, why are you thinking of positive? Yes, because you always bring up the barriers. And I said, that's not what I did, but that's what they read into. It's like, but I don't know if it's you and me, or I don't know if it's the research or what, but we do tend to see what we haven't accomplished. And I think, why don't we look into what we have? I don't know, what would be your idea? What will be accomplished?
I mean, the first thing that I think I'm proud of, or perhaps I've seen a difference in the last 20 years, is like we can now openly talk about there is an issue in terms of unconscious, in terms of women, in terms of roles, in the organization and at home, and everybody accept it. And that has been like a big, big achievement, I think, over the last 20 years. Inside my organization, for instance, sometimes we talk about that, I managed to really create something in order to help more women into the organization, or to help, I guess, the mobility in the organization, or at least to have that topic on the open for people to talk about. So I think in that sense, we have, I think, a big achievement. And also in terms of the awareness that I see my students, they are much more aware of that. I don't know about you. What is your biggest achievement?
Okay. Yes, I do think, I agree with you that it is not such a strange subject matter, that it's sort of on the floor. We can talk about it, and we're celebrating Women's Day. Organizations are interested in inviting you to talk, to share your experiences. And I do think that women's type of leadership has been more accepted. If we go back to the category of transformational leadership and transactional leadership, I think that the transformational leadership is held more, exerted more by women, is more accepted, and it's exerted by men too. So I think that is an accomplishment, not our accomplishment. It's not something that you and I did, but it's definitely something that has been moving on and that has happened. And I also think that part of what I see in my students, which was your other question, is that they act more empowered. They are more willing to fight for what they believe in. I don't know the percentage, no, I don't know how many, because the ones that come to me are already interested in the subject. We have carried out some activities, and we can talk some about that. At our university, we have copied some from you, some stuff, holding a full
Very
week,
happy to.
about women, but we do it in November. I don't know why. That's the way it happened the first time. And what we have done to create awareness in the students is put up the figures, put up the percentages, put up the comparisons of men and women. And some people see them and react, like, what? I cannot believe that in mechanical engineering, blah, blah, blah. Or I still can't think that why is it that psychology is mostly studied by women? That type of thing creates awareness. But that has a limit, Once it becomes paisaje. How would you say paisaje? It becomes
environment or context.
Yeah, it becomes part of the view, the scenery. It becomes part of the scenery, and it doesn't. So I don't know how to question, which is one of the things that our women in upper management mentioned, is stereotypes. Gender stereotypes are still very strong and going. And I think that that's something that we can work on at the university level. But any ideas around that are more than welcome.
Well, part of these stereotypes, and I agree because we've been collaborating for so long. Remember, we used to have like one day of the woman's celebration, and then I copied you because you were doing it in the different areas of the university. So that's why I became, and I decided to create like 1 week, and now we are up to 1 month. So if we continue like that, it will be the whole year, which is probably what it had to be. And the whole idea is like, instead of looking only at the problems, it's like saying, I'm going to see, like in this case, it's 33 different areas in IE, what each one of those areas is doing in terms of women. Some of them is create awareness, some of them is creating, activities for the students. So it's trying not only to tackle the problems, but also to really make it what is going on in that issue in the different, and probably this is one of the challenges because it's very horizontal type of work.
Mm-hmm. Right.
It's not so much a research that I'm going to find like the physics of something, a new formula or a new instrument. It's a much more subtle work on really going at all levels in all different areas in physics.
And all the disciplines.
Exactly. And that is why it takes so long, because it's trying to go to permeate the whole of the studies or the whole of society with something that still is there. And because of those stereotypes that you were mentioned, remember this research you did on the GAPI?
Why don't you share the GAPI? Why don't you come up with that?
Well, it was a group. We have like some funding for different foundations like OAC and Alcoa. And then we create this group of researchers that I think it was the most wonderful thing about the project. It was people like you, that they came together and tried to find out all these unconscious stereotypes. The whole idea was the roles women and men should play both at home and at work. And to what extent those roles have changed or not in the different societies. I don't know if I make much clear, or you can clarify it a little bit better.
No, I would add that it was a way of going to the unconscious, because using figures and puzzles and representations, then people are aware of what it is you're getting at. Although you gave them, being ethical, you gave all the information, but I do think that and they realized that they had these stereotypes. But the question is, how can we change them? How can we act? How can we go into the classroom, into their couples' relations? How can we impact everyday life?
It's something that I've been reflecting. We've been talking about this quite a lot. It's a very clear thing that we have our ancestors, and that's why I was talking about this book about my family. But our ancestors' culture is part of ourselves. So that role of what woman should be, of maternity, part of the problem in organizations clearly is the taking care of children or taking care of elderly, and it still is the barrier number one. So the role of woman as the main caretaker and the role of men as the main bread provider still is there very, very, very strongly. And that's why we did these puzzles to see how much from my grandmother's time and myself and my aspirational needs have I changed. And then what was the problem? Because if it was a big change from what it was expected and from what I want, there is tension. But if there is no tension, then it's like nothing have changed. Right. So going back to your question is, do I accept tension in the way I live my life, as opposed to what unconsciously my old families and ancestors are telling me how should I live my life? Yes. And I think to me this is the most difficult stereotype to break. Is the role.
Very interesting. I had never seen it so clearly as you just stated.
Oh, really?
And there's something that came to my mind in our research about Latin American women. One of the things that they chose as being a support was that they had help at home and help with their families, from their families. And I think that's a double bind thing, because I told my students last week, yes, these women use help, but these other women that are helping are women. So it's still, you are maintaining what you just said, carrying from generation to generation that this is a woman's job. So I think that, I love to do the things I do at home for my family. And this is something that I cherish. But how much does it limit a woman, I remember the president of Johnson & Johnson, and she said, I work as hard as my husband, but when we have guests, I am the one that arrives to put the flowers, to make sure the menu is ready. And my husband is he does a lot of things too, but I want to do it. And I always think in this, I want to. How much was that learned?
And this has a parallel, which is very interesting. We did a research with Moroccan woman and a Spanish woman. And one of the interesting findings, it was like exactly this flower thing, not only happened at home, but also in the organization. So this Moroccan colleague was saying, she was the director of the executive unit. But however, whenever there was like people coming into the class, and then she realized something was missing, like the flowers or the water, because she knew the secretary, because she knew the cleaning lady, she will go take the cupboard and take the flowers and the vases. So the perception of people, it was like she was the helper. And her colleagues that they were sitting waiting for something to happen, they were the important ones. And suddenly I realized I was doing much of the same. Because of course I knew the secretaries, I knew the cleaning, I knew whenever something was wrong, instead of staying quiet like my colleagues and relaxed, I thought I had the duty of having people happy. So if it was cold or I have to change the lighting of the room, it was my responsibility. So it's a little bit this taking a caretaker that is transferred into the organization as well.
And that brings up an anecdote from my first job. I was 20-something, and I was the head of industrial relations, which was the name then. And I remember in a meeting, the marketing manager wrote me a little note. When is the coffee coming? He said, why is this my job? And I answered, I have no idea. But I was very aware that if I even if I was industrial relations, which supposedly includes that type of stuff, I wasn't going to do it. He could get up. He wasn't impelled to get up and find about coffee. But he thought I was the only woman. He thought I could do it.
Exactly.
So I think that, without being mean and without creating a big hustle or, a big problem, I think that we do have to set the stage, draw the line is the expression I was looking for, into certain things, because those things are seen as less. That's the problem. If they were seen as great, then that would be different. But I don't know, we got carried away into other things.
Yeah, I like to, have I think another 5 or 10 minutes. I'm very interested in talking about two issues. First is the challenges that we still face. And probably the last one, it will be what is in the agenda? What is what we have? And I don't know what is the challenges. In my case, when you were saying the first thing is still changing the stereotype, changing the way we perceive the roles of men and women. Now, my fear now is there is quite a lot of a trend, mostly in the younger ones, that they want to change everything, not only the role men and women play, but to change the existence of woman itself. And it's in my students, I every year I see more and more women, mostly women more than men, defining themselves as non-binaries. So then if they don't define themselves as women, it became more complicated, because I agree that the social roles, the gender is constructed. Many of our roles as men and women or as humans is constructed. However, how much is constructed? Because if the whole idea of womanhood is constructed, I don't know if this is going to be good or bad for women, mostly now that we're still in transition and we have not yet achieved total equality. That is one of my fears. I don't know about your...
that's a gray line there. I don't know how to go about that, this non-binary, and we are including it now in our surveys, and surveys that you answered included too. But I do think, and as a psychologist, that we construct an identity, whichever it is, and just as long as there are no power relations in that identity, I'm okay with it. But we deal with a power issue where men are men, however they define themselves in their preferences. Men are still up there, and they are holding most of the power positions and making most of the decisions. So I still think that we need to work on further on having women become empowered, and other genders too. But my thing is to work with women and having more women in power positions. That's the way where I feel that that's my major challenge. And I think we spoke about this at some point, that I think that this women issue has become old-fashioned, no, that's done. We started speaking today, we already reached all the goals. I don't think that's true. And I think we have to maintain. So in terms of where we're going from here, I think that we have to maintain the awareness. We have to maintain the fight for the numbers to improve. We have to maintain the support for women in whatever their activities they do, all the work-life balance issues. I think we still have to move further with that. I don't know what you think.
Yeah, I think sometimes I feel we are a little bit our generation in a sandwich, because we see in one side the whole society, and I feel it's very much dominated by men and the top positions, and we need to make a big effort to change their mentality. But then on the other side, the younger ones, because they believe everything is solved, and they can be new trendy and something that is more appealing for the generation. They're talking about non-binary and more about a happy world. Of course, all this agenda of sustainability is crucial, but they mix a little bit the gender with the sustainability, with the rights of human beings, to the development of the world, lack of poverty. So they make the woman something like, this is already the biggest thing is achieved. As women, we work in everything else. And I agree, as women, we can work in everything else. But this is not yet solved.
Right.
Because on the other side, I can look at my right and I see it's not solved. But I look at my left and I don't see, they see the problem. Exactly the way when I entered the bank, I didn't see the problem as well, because I thought it was old-fashioned. So probably gender and the woman agenda is an old-fashioned subject since 100 years ago. It's always the old-fashioned subject that we still have to move forward. Perhaps
Yes.
I don't know if it's a way of putting that.
I agree fully with you. I agree fully with you. Now, I don't know if it's you and I that believe that only, but because we have been, working on this for so long, and we see some progress made in terms of acceptance of their
Definitely.
leadership, in terms of some of the numbers, yes. But the issues are still there.
Mm-hmm. And still, and even I see among the youngest, whoever give up a career tend to be always the woman. And it still is happening, even in the younger ones.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like a cycle.
Mm-hmm. When there are cases where it's the other way around, you can count them in one hand.
Yeah. And
there
it's
are
still
very,
for the
very
younger
few.
ones.
Yes. Very few.
So it's something, perhaps it's try to put in fashionable terms something that is old-fashioned. So getting into their language, getting to the Instagram storytelling, we live in an emotional world now. And in a community, I think the two main issues in the society we're living now in the 20th century, 21st century is emotionality, and everything is moving by emotions. And the other thing is community. You need to be part of a tribe. That was the book I wrote. So you need tribe and you need emotions. So perhaps we need to reframe the woman agenda to put it more into a community tribe level and in a more emotional storytelling form. Because the rationality in which I learned and I researched, because I wanted to understand, perhaps in addition to understand, the young generation wanted to feel. We have to put it in emotional terms. I don't know. This is perhaps a
that's new, Celia. You're telling me something new. You're putting a new agenda for me, which I like. I think that's a very good way to go. Yes. But let's put men in there too,
Yeah.
Because they have their emotions a lot more diminished in terms of expression, at least, because emotions, we all have them.
Yeah, and in part of that research, it was that, in the transitional times, if women need to change the role, we need to help men to change the role as well. Because many men, they're not happy in this bread providing and competitors and always be the manhood. So all these new masculinities, which is also another area of studies that is quite interesting, we should work more with the masculinities and the feminities and try to make it more approachable and more emotionally attractive. But perhaps the last word, because I think our time is running quickly. I don't know how to tell you. Is this 20 years of researching on gender has been like a satisfying work? If now you have to go back 20 years back, would you just have chosen any other subject or?
No. If I were going to go back, I would do it all over again. I think that I have enjoyed this subject matter. First of all, because I believe in that. It's a passion of how to support women and make women's advancement further. And it's an exciting subject, and it's a very interesting subject. I have a daughter. I have a granddaughter. So I think that this is a must. So I wouldn't change the subject. How about you?
Yeah, probably I'm happy as well. I recognize I have a lot of satisfactions and a lot of frustrations as well.
Yeah,
it's a little bit of, but overall, and also what you say, when I was writing this book about my family and I saw my great grandmother, I was analyzing the 3 generations back and what was the changes. So looking at even my mother was a scholar and her salary had to go into my father's account because in Spain it was forbidden for women to open a bank account.
That has changed.
Yeah, so my mother, that was a scholar, and she couldn't get her own salary. I don't have children, unfortunately, but I have nieces. So I don't want, and I think we can lose so quickly all these achievements that I don't know if it's a vocation or it's a call, but I think I need to be there and working on that with the frustrations and the satisfactions. But I really think we need many people to be there reminding that we cannot go back in our rights. because it
Right.
took too many generations of women fighting for us. But
Well, I'm there with you, Celia.
okay.
You lead. You keep on leading.
No, it's been great to be able to work with people like you. That really is a learning process.
Thank you.
And
Thank
probably
you.
my biggest satisfaction is the learning. And all the learning
Yes,
that I
we
did
learned a lot.
with people like you, it's wonderful. So I think
Yes,
our time
thank you,
is over.
Celia.
So thank you very much. And whoever is out there, thank you for listening. Okay.
Thank you,
Bye-bye.
Celia.